Vietnam, Binh Thuy Province, 1970. Time, 2:41 a.m. The air hung thick and warm, clinging to the skin like a damp shroud. Within the jungle's triple canopy, even a drop of water could vanish before touching the ground. The night was not simply dark, it was dense. It felt as though the air itself had turned black. Near the forest floor, 4 silhouettes moved in a low, fluid line. They did not speak. They did not whisper. No metallic click, no shifting gear, no tremor of hesitation. Just soft, controlled footsteps sinking into the wet soil, and occasionally the faint slide of a stone hidden beneath layers of leaves. These 4 shadows were a patrol team from the New Zealand SAS. Tonight they were not here for a simple ambush or reconnaissance. Tonight they were about to carve a silent wound into the jungle, a wound so precise, so invisible, that an entire region's behavior would change in the days that followed. Roughly a kilometer ahead sat a small Viet Cong base. Official maps showed nothing, no markings, no symbols, just green. But the intelligence that reached the SAS told a different story. This small, invisible base was actually a junction point, where tunnels met, where supply lines crossed, and where enemy patrols emerged and vanished again like ghosts inside the undergrowth. The orders the SAS team received earlier that day were short and deceptively simple. Observe, confirm, neutralize if feasible, leave minimal trace, create maximum psychological disruption. On paper, that looked clean. In the jungle, those words meant something else entirely, a thin, fragile line between survival and disappearance. Before we follow them deeper into the forest, the story must pause. To understand what is about to happen, you need to understand who these men were. The New Zealand SAS was elite not because of numbers. They had very few men, but because of a razor-sharp filtration of character, discipline, and instinct. 3 traits defined them more than anything else. 1. The selection process, breaking the body to reveal the mind. Anyone could volunteer. Almost no one passed. Weeks of marches with brutal loads, hours without sleep, tests designed not to measure strength but to break it, and then see what remained. The goal was not to find the toughest men. It was to find the ones who would not stop. There was a saying among instructors: "The jungle doesn't kill you, your mind kills you. We need men whose minds refuse." 2. Jungle literacy, reading the forest like a book. Where other soldiers saw trees, SAS soldiers saw information. A sudden silence among birds, a fresh cut on a vine, a footprint with uneven pressure, smoke drifting at a strange angle, a metallic noise swallowed by cricket songs. To them, these were sentences. The jungle was a language, and they were fluent. 3. Disciplined patience. Aggression is easy. Patience is not. Most soldiers trained to fight. SAS soldiers trained to wait, to observe a target for days, to sit unmoving while insects bite and rain falls, to return without firing a single shot if the timing is not perfect. That is not passivity, it is discipline. If you're still reading and already immersed, I want to ask you something. What do you personally find more fascinating about elite units, training, equipment, the mindset? Drop a one-word comment like mindset, tactics, or training. It helps shape which stories I craft next. Now, back to the patrol. 6 hours before stepping into the jungle, the 4-man NZSAS patrol gathered inside a bamboo shack. The briefing was short, quiet, and loaded with implications. The American intelligence officer rolled out a hand-drawn map. It contained almost nothing. A red circle marking the approximate position of the VC camp. 2 likely patrol routes. 2 potential tunnel mouths. A shaded area labeled simply unknown. He tapped the paper with the back of his pen. Our men keep hearing things out there. Movement, whispering, traps resetting. Sometimes they take fire from nowhere. They go in loud. The enemy answers with shadows. We need you to find those shadows. The SAS team leader studied the map carefully, silently. No dramatic speech, no, "We'll get them." Not even a nod. Just one question. "When was the last contact?" The American replied, "3 nights ago, no casualties." But the patrol refused to go back. That line stuck with the SAS team. If trained soldiers refused to return, whatever was out there was far more complicated than the map suggested. Bimol! The operation began soon after sunset. No helicopters? Too loud. No support vehicles? Too obvious. Only miles of foot movement. Once the men stepped under the canopy, they entered what they called the bubble, a mental state where the outside world shrank to sound, vibration, shadows, and breath. Each man played a role. Point man, the pathfinder, eyes low, scanning for traps. Team leader, 360-degree thinker, constantly adjusting risk. Radio operator, carrying lifelines and ammunition. Rear security, watching the back, absorbing every flicker behind them. Walking through the jungle was not walking. It was decision after decision. Which root is too dry and may snap? Which vine was cut recently? Whether that moisture on a leaf is dew or someone brushing past it moments ago. Whether the silence is natural or the sign of an enemy nearby. To an outsider, the patrol seemed slow. To them, it was controlled tempo, a rhythm honed through years. If you're enjoying this type of slow burn, detail-rich narrative, hit the like button or leave a quick comment. It genuinely helps push long documentary content like this to viewers who appreciate it. The men continued. The real story was only beginning. At 0037, the point man raised his left fist, the silent signal to freeze. A patch of grass. Slightly pressed down. That was all. But to the trained eye, it was a paragraph of information. The SAS tracker crouched, slid 2 fingers through the grass, pressed lightly into the soil, and whispered, his voice lower than a breath. 2 men. 1 armed, 1 carrying weight. Passed here less than 3 hours ago. Direction, north. These deductions weren't guesses. They were results of thousands of hours of training. The patrol followed, but not directly. Never stepping onto the enemy's trail. You never walk on an enemy's path. If he leaves it intentionally, he expects someone foolish to follow. Instead, they paralleled the trail from 10 to 15 meters away. 40 minutes later, the forest carried a faint sound, metal brushing against metal. Barely audible, but unmistakable. They were close. Now, the story is about to move from patience to precisions. Before an SAS raid begins, there's always one crucial phase, seeing without being seen. The team reached a shallow rise overlooking a clearing. Dense foliage covered their bodies while granting them narrow lines of sight downward. Below, illuminated by a small fire in the rhythmic glow of embers, lay the Viet Cong camp. No fancy bunkers. No fortified positions. Just 4 bamboo huts, a cooking pit, hammocks, and shadows of fighters moving between them. No night vision devices existed for them. This was 1970, the era of raw observation. For 30 minutes they watched. How many fighters were active, how often the guards rotated, where the smoke drifted, who carried radios, who seemed to be in charge, where the invisible corners of the camp were, and where one particular fighter kept disappearing. That last point mattered. The man entered a dark corner behind the fire repeatedly. That could only mean one thing. A tunnel entrance. Tunnels were the Viet Cong's lungs, arteries, and veins. Collapse one, and you suffocate the unit. While observing, the team also sensed something else. The camp was relaxed. Too relaxed. Their guard rotation had gaps. Their patrols were irregular. Their readiness was low. This camp was not preparing for battle. It felt safe. That sense of safety was about to be shattered. The SAS team leader, lying prone in thick foliage, silently processed the situation. He had 2 choices. Option A, leave quietly, collect intelligence, confirm the presence of tunnels and fighters, return safely, mission technically accomplished. Option B, strike, a surgical, terrifying, silent strike. Minimal noise, maximum confusion. 1 minute of chaos, Days of psychological shock. For regular infantry, a raid means blasting a camp apart. For the SAS, a raid means influencing the enemy's mind, and they chose the raid. Because the goal was not to destroy the camp. The goal was to destabilize it, to change how Viet Cong fighters felt about this jungle, to make them question every rustle, every shadow, every absent sound, to make them fear the unseen. The team began sketching the attack in their heads. SAS doctrine in the jungle was extremely clear. No loud firefights, no prolonged battles, no burning the camp, no chasing fleeing fighters. A raid was successful only if 1. The enemy's communication collapsed. 2. Leadership was removed or disabled. 3. Tunnel access was neutralized. 4. Terror replaced confidence. 5. The SAS vanished without a trace. Their plan focused on timing, not firepower. Key elements of the plan. 1. Attack. During guard rotation. It was the sloppiest moment. One guard tired, the other not yet alert. 2. Neutralize the radio. First egg camp cut off from communication is a camp halfway defeated. 3. Collapse the tunnel entrance. This would cripple movements and trap fighters underground. 4. Identify and strike the leader. Leadership falls. Morale collapses. 5. Withdraw. Within 90 seconds, a raid longer than a minute and a half was not their style. The team silently split into positions around the camp. 2 men near the tunnel entrance. 1 covering the likely escape route. The team leader positioned slightly behind with a clear view of the entire camp. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. Everything glowed in shifting grayscale. Humidity clung to their sleeves. At 2:39, guards began to switch posts. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The exhausted outgoing guard stretched his back. The incoming guard was adjusting his sandals, yawning, blinking away sleep. A perfect gap. The team leader raised his hand, the silent cue. The signal was not a gunshot, nor a grenade, nor a shout. It was a small directional flare fired into the soil, only visible to the SAS operators watching for it. Then the night cracked, but not loudly. Second one, a suppressed shot. The new guard drops without a sound. Second 4, another suppressed shot. The radio operator collapses near the fire. Second 7, 2 SAS operators sprint like shadows toward the tunnel entrance. Second 12, a small explosive is planted, not to create noise, but to push the tunnel inward. Second 17, boom! A muffled thump. So contained it could be mistaken for bamboo snapping. Dirt and wooden beams collapse inward, sealing the tunnel. Second 20, chaos erupts. Half-awake fighters grab rifles and fire wildly into empty darkness. Some run toward the tunnel, only to find a wall of debris. Others hide behind bamboo poles, unsure where the attack came from. The SAS move like a metronome. Rhythmic, precise. Second 26. The team leader spots the man shouting orders. Short burst. He goes down. Second 40. Rear security engages 2 fleeing fighters. Short controlled bursts. Not lethal, unless necessary, but enough to force them back toward the camp. Second 60. The SAS halt. The mission's objectives are met. Communication. Down. Leadership. Neutralized. Tunnel. Destroyed. Panic. Achieved. Second 75. The leader whispers the final code. Objective complete. Exfil. The SAS did not retreat along the path they came from. That would be predictable and deadly. They disappeared into a side route mapped earlier, but never used. Within seconds, the jungle swallowed them. Behind them, Viet Cong fighters shouted in confusion. Some fired into the trees, some tried to chase, but it was pointless. A small, elite team that controlled time and silence could not be hunted. After roughly 1 hour, the SAS reached the extraction point. There were no congratulations, no high fives, no cheers. Just 4 men breathing steadily, faces unreadable, gear intact. Mission complete. When Allied patrols cautiously approached the area the next day, they noticed immediate changes. Some Viet Cong trails had been abandoned. Fires had been extinguished in a hurry. Piles of documents were half burned, equipment was scattered, and critically, several tunnel entrances were collapsed from the inside. The psychological effect was undeniable. Something had happened here, something the Viet Cong fighters could not understand or anticipate. They knew how to fight. American helicopters, artillery, napalm, armored vehicles, large assaults. But this? 4 silent shadows who arrived unnoticed, struck with surgical precision, and vanished. That kind of enemy did not just threaten their bodies. It attacked their minds. This was the real purpose of the raid. Fear is the oldest weapon in warfare. Older than spears, older than fire, older than written history. But for the SAS, fear wasn't generated through brutality or heavy firepower. It was generated through absence of sound, footprints, warning, patterns, predictability. The Viet Cong could brace themselves for loud American assaults. They could prepare for artillery barrages, or flee from roaring helicopter engines. But they had no way to prepare for something they could not see, could not hear, could not anticipate. In the following days after the raid, intercepted enemy radio communications described the attackers as forest ghosts and silent death. This terminology wasn't new in Vietnam, but its reappearance in this sector meant one thing. The SAS operation had achieved exactly what it intended. The VN jungle was not simply a physical space, it was a psychological battlefield. When tunnels collapsed, routes abandoned, and small camps suddenly evacuated, American analysts sometimes misinterpreted these events as enemy weakness. But Special Forces operators knew better. They knew that these shifts weren't weakness at all. They were evidence of the enemy trying to regain psychological equilibrium after a threat they did not understand. The SAS raid had produced several cascading effects. 1. Patrol disruption. For at least 3 to 4 days, enemy patrols in the northern sector nearly stopped. 2. Tunnel reconfiguration. Intercepted reports suggested that multiple tunnels were sealed voluntarily to prevent unexpected infiltration. 3. Morale fracture. The idea that unknown men could appear and vanish made fighters distrust their own terrain. In guerrilla warfare, morale is not a luxury, it is a weapon. After returning to base, the SAS team underwent the standard debriefing. But standard for them looked nothing like regular infantry frameworks. There were no dramatic retellings, no self-praise, no inflated narratives. Instead, they focused on environmental factors, tacit coordination, timing anomalies, enemy behavior, communication lapses, equipment efficiency, terrain exploitation, tunnel dimensions, estimated, body language of enemy fighters, patterns in their night routines. For example, one operator noted that the guard rotation lasted slightly longer than expected, roughly 90 to 100 seconds between full transition. This was key intelligence. Another noted the fire pit's embers were low, meaning the camp was preparing to settle in rather than move soon. A third mentioned that 2 fighters wore slightly cleaner uniforms, indicating they may have visited another command post earlier. These small details, irrelevant to an untrained eye, were gold to analysts. The team didn't simply tell a story, they provided data. And this data shaped future missions, not only for Zealand SAS, but for American and Australian units operating nearby. Culture. Why the Zealand SAS could do what others could not. This is especially true for the Zealand SAS. Their culture grew from New Zealand's rugged terrain, harsh individual training traditions, years of long-range desert patrol heritage. A military ethos that prioritized small, elite teams, a national personality rooted in modesty and precision. The SAS operated under a philosophy that could be summarized in one line: don't be loud, be right. Where some forces emphasized display, Zealand SAS emphasized outcome. Where others trained for maximum aggression, the SAS trained for maximum control. Where units sought high body counts, the SAS sought high-value disruption. This difference in mindset made them uniquely effective in the Vietnam context. Modern forces studying old lessons. It may seem strange that operators in the 21st century study small jungle raids from 1969 to 1971, but there are good reasons. The SAS Vietnam raids demonstrate universals. 1. You cannot defeat what you cannot detect. Stealth beats numbers. 2. You cannot plan for an enemy you cannot predict. Unpredictability beats routine. 3. You cannot maintain morale if you fear the unseen. Psychology beats firepower. These lessons apply to modern missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Africa, the Pacific, Eastern Europe, and counter-terror operations globally. Instructors across special forces schools still use Vietnam raids as case studies for perfect timing, low-footprint tactics, and the integration of reconnaissance with surgical action. Over the next week, American units began to observe subtle but unmistakable changes. Patrol densities changed. Supply movement slowed. Intercepts revealed confusion. Villagers reported unusual VC activity at night. Some bases were moved deeper into the jungle. Other bases were abandoned entirely. This was the shadow effect, a phenomenon where the presence or suspected presence of elite operators reshapes enemy behavior without requiring repeated attacks. A single SAS raid could influence 5 square kilometers of jungle, 3 to 4 enemy squads, 2 or 3 tunnel networks, and a week or more of enemy planning cycles. That is the power of micro-actions producing macro results. It is easy to think of Special Forces operators as machines, silent, perfect, cold. But the men in this patrol were fathers, brothers, sons, farmers, mechanics, teachers, hunters, rugby players, volunteers. They weren't superheroes. They were highly trained professionals who willingly stepped into environments that most people would never survive a single night in. One operator wore a simple photograph of his family wrapped in waterproof cloth. Another carved a small mark on his rifle stock for every mission that ended without losing a teammate. These human details matter because they remind us that elite units are not defined by gear, but by spirit. The NZ SAS raid succeeded because it rested on 5 pillars. 1. Patience hours of silent tracking for a minute of action. 2. Information. Knowing the terrain, the habits, the weaknesses. 3. Timing. Attacking at the exact moment of vulnerability. 4. Precision. Hitting only what mattered, not wasting a single round. 5. Disappearance. Leaving without allowing pursuit. These pillars work in any decade, any jungle, any war. Most people imagine special operations as a single dramatic action, like the 90-second strike itself. But in reality, the raid you followed was actually 4 separate micro-missions happening within one. Mission A. Infiltration without detection. Getting into position without alerting. Tripwire traps. Local scouts. Hidden listening posts. Tunnel openings. Patrol lines. Or even animals trained to signal movement. In Vietnam, silence was not enough. You had to move without changing the environment. Not snapping a twig, not disturbing birds, not crushing wet soil loudly, not brushing against bamboo too sharply, not changing insect rhythm. The jungle had ears. Mission B. Observation. Without disturbance. Finding an observation point was an art. It couldn't offer a silhouette. It couldn't be on soft soil that retained prints. It couldn't be near plants that would bounce back unnaturally. It couldn't be in an ant or termite path. It needed both cover and escape routes. Mission C, the strike fast. Precise, brutal in its efficiency. Mission D, vanishing without trace, leaving the jungle without giving away. Direction, distance, exfil point, team size, weapon type, or whether they were coming back. This complexity is why Special Forces history values these raids so deeply. They are miniature masterpieces of controlled violence and psychological influence. One reason the New Zealand SAS earned disproportionate respect was because they were masters of leaving nothing behind. No. Brass casings, footprints, blood trails, torn vegetation, rope marks, artificial odors, or boot pattern signatures. Sometimes they even brushed leaves back into place or sprinkled dry soil over damp spots to remove shine from disturbed earth. In some operations, enemy trackers were brought in to determine what happened. Those trackers would study the ground for hours and conclude, nothing passed through here. And yet men had passed through, and they had carried out raids, and people had died, and tunnels had collapsed. The lack of trace was the trace. Within a week of the raid described in this story, the Viet Cong adapted in several telling ways. 1. Tighter guard rotation shifts became shorter. Pairs were doubled up. Sleep schedules changed. 2. Deeper tunnels. Some entrances were moved further underground to avoid surface detection. 3. Noise-disciplined fighters began enforcing quieter movement and stricter camp procedures. 4. Scattered camps. Instead of one medium-sized camp, VC reorganized into clusters of smaller hideouts. 5. Increased superstition. Reports suggested that some fighters carried charms or avoided certain sectors at night. These reactions demonstrated a profound truth. When an elite unit strikes effectively, the enemy changes, not just location, but mindset. For the 4 NZ SAS operators who executed the raid, the event was not a cinematic highlight. It was a job, a duty, a piece of a larger movement. But if you could sit with them years later, gray hair, lined faces, voices quieter than they used to be, you'd hear them describe the experience like this. We trusted each other. That's what got us home. The jungle teaches you humility fast. Precision kept us alive. We didn't think about death. We thought about not making mistakes. You move differently when 4 lives depend on one decision. These admissions show something fundamental. Special operations are not about heroism. They are about responsibility. The responsibility to read the terrain, read the enemy, read your team, and read yourself. If any of these readings fail, a mission collapses instantly. Elite performance is not created by equipment. It is created by how you think under pressure. The NZ SAS mindset consisted of 1. Acceptance of hardship. If it's easy, it's worthless. 2. Comfort with discomfort. Sleep deprivation, hunger, and silence were tools. 3. Precision above aggression. A single well-timed action was worth more than 100 loud ones. 4. Team before ego. Every man's strength covered another man's weakness. 5. Adaptability. No plan survived the jungle. Only adaptable minds did. This mental framework is why their raids continue to be studied. Lessons for modern military thinking. You can learn 5 core strategic lessons from this 90-second jungle raid. Lesson 1. Intelligence creates victory. The raid was won during observation, not during shooting. Lesson 2. Timing determines outcome. A 10-second window can define success or failure. Lesson 3. Small teams change. Big systems. A 4-man patrol disrupted the behavior of an entire sector for days. Lesson 4. Psychological impact has strategic value. Fear reshapes the battlefield as effectively as firepower. Lesson 5. Stealth is power. What the enemy cannot predict is what the enemy cannot stop. These lessons transcend time, applying not just to Vietnam, but to every environment where modern operators work. This wasn't the largest battle in Vietnam. It didn't change the course of the war. It won no medals. It rarely appears in books. But it matters. It matters because it shows how skilled small teams can achieve maximum impact with minimum visibility, using precise timing, disciplined silence, and total trust. It matters because it reminds us that wars are not decided only by large armies, but by the invisible actions of small, extraordinary groups. And above all, it matters because it captures what the NZSAS truly represented: quiet professionalism in a loud war. They were not superheroes. They were not ghosts. They were men with discipline, training, and unbreakable calm. Their story continues to inspire because it speaks to something universal, something beyond national borders or military eras. The human ability to act with precision in the harshest, darkest, most chaotic places on Earth. The jungle eventually swallowed every trace of the raid. The leaves regrew, the branches closed, the paths faded, the night returned to silence. But for a handful of Viet Cong fighters, and for the small New Zealand team that walked those shadows, that night never really ended. Because some operations live far longer than the minutes they occupy.